Hi folks, this is International Master Kostya Kavutskiy, and today we'll be discussing tactical combinations where more than one motive is present, often two or three motives and just one problem. Now, this is actually, I would imagine, one of the more common scenarios in games, as typically when you're calculating variations and looking for different tactics, many different motives show up over the course of your calculation. So I'll be presenting a couple problems where this is the case today, and hopefully I can espouse some practical advice as to how to make sure you're not missing specific resources when you're looking for forced tactical wins. So our first problem here is white to play and win. If you'd like, I'd encourage you to try and solve the position for yourself just to see if you can find the solution and test your tactical ability. But otherwise, we'll move on with the solution. So here, white clearly has some pressure against black's position. You might notice that black's back rank is potentially weak, and this knight on f5 is actively placed. And here, white wins with very strong move, queen to g5. We are hitting black's queen on d8, and of course we're using the weak back rank, and this is a nice deflection basically in order to try and lure the queen away from the back rank. Queen takes g5 just loses immediately to rook e8, but if you're able to find this move, of course the other threat is queen takes g7 mate. Hopefully you found that black has a reasonable defense in queen to f8. And now, without seeing white's next move, of course the solution is incomplete. White wins with another deflection, rook to e8. And this time black has no satisfactory response, as queen takes g7 is white's next move basically, no matter what. Any move like, okay, g6 doesn't really help black. White can take on f8 with check, and then queen h6 or knight h6, and the game is just lost for black. So a couple of things going on here. The first one is the back rank. Second is a deflection tactic, and then we have another deflection with rook to e8. How you can kind of improve your chances of finding this during the game? Well, of course it starts with practicing a lot of tactics on your own, especially in all these different themes, just so the moves themselves come very naturally to you. I think this idea of rook e8, this 8th rank deflection in order to get to the g7, this is quite a common motive, and any average player around 17 or 1800 at this point in their career should have seen this kind of tactic multiple times. And once you see a tactic, the same pattern multiple times, you're getting more likely to find it more and more often. You'll still miss it every once in a while, but the more of these problems you solve, the more of these motives you kind of store in the back of your mind, the more likely you are to able to find them in various positions. With that, let's move on to our next problem. Here again, we have white to play and win, and if you'd like, you can try and pause the video and solve the position for yourself. Well, it's clear that white is up in development here, but needs to find a concrete way in order to exploit his advantage. And here white won with a very strong knight e6. Now the first point behind this move is that if f takes e6, this opens up the h5 e8 diagonal, so this is essentially a line clearing sacrifice, and white wins with a direct attack against the king. Queen h5 check, king f8, bishop h6, king g8, rook g4, and black is just lost. Now this is pretty simple to calculate, but if you're in tune with the position, of course you realize that after knight e6, black is not forced to take the knight, but as a second option, queen to a5. And now the question is, how should white follow up here? Now you could play knight c7 check, and black would most likely play king to d8, take on a8, and bishop takes a8. And indeed this would be advantageous for white, but as I believe it was the great Tarrasch once said, or maybe it was Lasker, when you see a good move you should look for a better one. And here, instead of knight c7 check, which only wins the exchange, rook a4 is actually trapping black's queen, and white is winning the game. Now, as far as the difficulty of this combination, I think most players would be able to spot knight e6. It's quite a thematic idea, especially for the Sicilian defense. This rook a4, though, I would imagine a lot of players miss for a number of reasons. Number one, white has a strong option in knight c7 check, so they might not even look for anything better. And number two, the aspect of trapping pieces, the tactic of trapping pieces, It only comes into play once you realize that a piece is running short on squares. Here, if you did not realize that black's queen is in danger of being trapped, well then you wouldn't even look for a way to trap it. I think that's kind of one of the interesting things about the idea of trapping pieces is that the tactics, the moves themselves are usually not so hard to find. The harder part is actually being aware that the piece is even able to be trapped in the first place. What I mean is, if I gave this position to a random player around 1500 or 1600 and I said, oh, white to play and traps black's queen, most everyone would find rook a4, in under 10 seconds, right? Very easy move to find. But if I give you this random position and say white to play and find the best move, a lot of players would miss this rook a4 because they're not even looking for a way to trap black's queen. How to get around this in your game so you don't miss this kind of opportunity? Well, I think a lot of strong players, they develop this kind of awareness for all of their opponent's pieces and which ones are running short on squares. And once you kind of notice that the black's queen is running short on squares, you might intuitively look for a way to attack the queen or trap it. I think this is kind of self-evident in the games of strong players. So the only main point here is try to keep aware of your opponent's pieces and where they are at all times, and the potential escape squares that they may or may not have. Our last example for today is a relatively famous game, and here we have white to play and win once again. If you'd like to try and solve the puzzle, feel free to pause the video and spend a couple minutes on it. So here playing white was the Great World Champion Max Oive, and it's quite a complicated position. It seems like both sides have their fair share of the dynamic chances. All the pieces on the board seem to be particularly active. But with white to play, he has a very strong win in bishop to d5. The point of this move is white has unleashed a double attack. The bishop is of course attacking black's queen and bishop, and more importantly, white is threatening rook takes f8 mate. Black has basically no defense to this double attack. The second point is that if black would play a move like rook takes f2, white does not capture anything but instead has queen g8 mate on the board. And so black's back rank ends up being weak and no defense to the number of threats. Now, why is bishop d5 important? Well, the thing is that black has all this pressure on g2. So if white moved his bishop to another square, let's say bishop to b3, the same queen g8 check is still in the air, so rook takes f2 is not possible. But here black has defensive resources available to him. For example, queen takes g2 is a very strong defense. Now if rook takes g2, white himself gets mated with rook takes f1. And after queen takes g2, black can play rook takes f2, rook takes f2, and is going to win back the queen. Now white ends up with a winning endgame here anyways, but of course this is not as strong as just giving mate. In fact, I believe black does have some defense here as well. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, after bishop b3, white is winning anyways, but of course bishop to d5 on the first move is a much stronger continuation and basically forces resignation on the spot. So a number of different tactics here going on. First, we saw the weakness of the back rank. Of course, there's a double attack on the board. And lastly, putting the bishop on d5 is a very nice example of the interference tactic, or also known as the line blocking, in order to disrupt the coordination with black's queen and bishop on the long diagonal. So we'll wrap up the lesson here. Hopefully you guys did find that instructive in terms of how to look for multiple motifs within a problem. In fact, I think most problems usually have more than one tactical idea going on. And the main thing to keep in mind is to just try and be aware of the potential ideas in every position. Make sure to check out the exercises provided with the lesson. I'm sure they will challenge you. And until next time, this was International Master Kostya Kavutskiy signing off.